Hey, what's up everybody? In this video tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to actually assemble the construction block assembly. All right, so in this case, we can see we have all three of those blocks from our previous video tutorials that are made. We have our arch block, rectangle block, and triangle block. Now what we want to do is put them together, okay? And with the use of Fusion 360, we're going to be using like Fusion glue, all right? We are going to call those joints. So you're going to be learning a little bit about joints and how we can put all this together. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and collapse my data panel. Actually, no, I'm not, because I want to bring stuff in to use, right? So I'm going to come over here to my arch block. And before I bring that in, and I can go ahead and just show you, if I go to drag something into a file, it's going to be giving you an error, and it's going to be saying, hey, you got to go out there and save the actual assembly. So I'm going to come up here and do a save, and I'm going to call this my construction block assembly. I'm now going to go ahead and hit save. All right, and now this is going to be my actual assembly. So now I can go ahead and collapse that data panel. Okay, and this is what we're going to be looking at. I just did it again. Why do I keep doing that? All right, we got to bring blocks in. All right, so at the base of this, we're going to be bringing in our arch block. So I'm going to drag this over the line. I'm going to drop that in. Okay, now if this comes in and is in a different orientation depending on which work plane that you started from, no problem. Here's what you can do. You're going to be seeing that you have these different dials here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, I don't know, maybe it needs to go in this direction. If I grab the dial and pull on it, you can see how I can change the orientation in degrees. Okay, you can go with 3 different axes on this and change these to get these where you want. Okay, I'm liking mine where it's at 0, 0. Okay, now the issue is that all parts that you bring in are going to be coming to this location right here. This is like the origin of our actual assembly. So you got different ways to manipulate this to get it off this area. So when you have parts that come in, especially really small parts, nothing's going to be getting in the way of you actually going to grab that to manipulate it. All right, so the first way is you can grab these different arrows off the triad and you can start pulling and tugging on these to get this where you want to go. All right, I was doing that forever and I didn't realize that you could just come here to the center dot and you could take this wherever you want, okay, in multiple different directions, okay? All right, so I am happy with where this is, so I'm gonna go ahead and say okay. All right, so the issue that we have right now in our assembly is that this block is still able to move. It's not fixed, it's not grounded. All right, so what we wanna do is come out here, come up to the actual arch block itself, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to come in here and ground it. So we can see ground is here at the top of the dialog box. Okay, that is ground. All right, we need to make sure to right click and ground this. Okay, if this comes up, just go ahead and hit continue. All right, so now if I come to grab this, you can see it's no longer able to move. So that is kind of the first rule with assemblies is make sure the first part you bring in, that's what we call the base component, make sure it is grounded. All right, so we have this where it needs to go. Now we're going to go ahead and drag in our triangle block. So we're gonna go ahead and just drag this over the line like so, bring that in, and once again, we can manipulate how we want this. So I know eventually we're going to want this flat side we have over here on this side. So I'm going to actually grab this by the dial and I'm going to pull that, making sure that that is going to be negative 180 degrees from where it was. And then I'm going to grab this point here at the center and get that out of the way and just say okay. All right, so this is still free floating. We can see it's not grounded, however, this one is. And the last thing I'm going to do is come over here to my rectangle block. I'm going to pick, pull, drag that over the line. Okay, we can see that that is coming in. All right, and the orientation where this is currently at for me is absolutely perfect. So I don't have to do any rotation with the dials. Instead, I'm just going to grab this from that center point, pull this over, and just go ahead and say okay. All right, so I have all 3 pieces that I need for my assembly. So at this point, this is now when I can go ahead and hide my data panel. You can see I'm always just a little bit overzealous on trying to get the most screen real estate that I can. All right, so now we're going to be using that fusion glue, those things called joints. This can get a little bit interesting. All right, if you're coming from the Inventor or SolidWorks background, if you're using constraints, it's going to be working a little bit differently. All right. Basically, back in the day, we were able to put parts in locations depending, well, basically using 3 different sets of clicks in order to constrain this according to planes. What we are learning with joints and what Autodesk has created for us is a way to go out there and specify points and then go out there and just tell it basically what its behavior needs to be, and it will take care of the rest. All right, so what I want to do is lay this triangle here flat on this surface and have this corner right here meet up with this corner right here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to orbit this over. Remember, if you need to do an orbit on the fly, okay, you're going to be holding down shift. And while you're holding down shift, you're going to be holding down the scroll wheel and you're going to be moving the mouse in order to do that orbit on the fly. Okay, you can always still come up here and use your view cube. A lot of you have figured that one out. Okay, you can grab the view cube and you can do this sort of pivot. All right, but honestly, in my opinion, I still think that orbit on the fly is going to be the best thing you can probably do and figure out in order to be really successful, okay, with Fusion. All right, so now I want to apply a joint. So up here, you can see this icon that looks like a hinge. That is joint. So I'm going to pick on joint, and you're going to see this small little dialog box, and it's, believe it or not, this really small dialog box is pretty powerful. You're going to see that there are 2 tabs. The first tab is called position. The second tab is called motion. Here's the deal with joints. You're going to be locating the position, 2 different positions, and then you're going to flip over to the second tab and you're going to explain what its behavior is. Okay, so in my case, I'm going to be flipping over, okay, this triangular piece, and I'm going to be coming in here. And you're going to see there's all sorts of different points. Now, when you go to different locations, you're going to see how the orientation of that point changes. All right, so I know I'm going to be flat on the bottom of this, and it's going to be up in this location right here. But you can see how it's toggling, and it's kind of, it can be kind of difficult sometimes. So I know that that orientation needs to look, okay, like that right there. So if I just come here towards the center, there's no other place for that to go, any other orientation. I like that orientation. So if I hold down Control, now this is going to be filtering where it's only looking at that particular orientation. Remember, I'm holding Control the whole time. Once I come over here, I can go ahead and pick on that orientation, all right, and pick on that point, and that's going to be my first joint origin. I'm now going to orbit over, and I want that joint orientation to come to this joint orientation right here. But once again, we can get in close. Things are getting a little bit goofy on its orientation. So I'm going to hold down Control, okay? And now I can come out here and find that exact point right there. All right, so now that location comes in. That part comes in, and it's exactly where it needs to be. Now we have to explain what its behavior is. So I'm now going to jump up here to the motion tab. I can see there's a rigid type, there's a revolute, there's a slider, there's a cylindrical, there's a pin slot, there's a planar, okay, and there's also ball. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to get into the other ones later, but the one that we're most interested in right now is a rigid, okay, it's going to be a rigid joint. If you want to know what the animation is, we could simply go ahead and hit play. All right, and it's going to show us that those are shaking, showing that those have a rigid connection. I can go ahead and stop that. Now let's say that maybe I want to just take a look at what Revolute does. All right, Revolute's going to go ahead and animate that for us. Maybe we want this to be a slider. We can see that there's going to be a slider connection between those. Now we can come here. This is going to be cylindrical. All right, so it's going to be able to move in 2 different axes. Now we have pin slot. Okay, now we have planar, which is going to be all over that face on that plane. And finally, this one is going to be ball. All right, so in our case, we like rigid. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say okay. All right, so now if I come to grab this triangle block, we can see it's not moving. Why? Because it's fully constrained to our base component, which was that arch block. And as you guessed, that arch block is not going to move because it is grounded. Why? Because rule number 1 says, go out there and ground your first part that you bring into an assembly. Okay, so now what we're going to do is move on to our rectangular part. All right, So what we're going to do is this time is we're going to come back in, go to joint. I'm going to be flipping this rectangle over, or this block over, okay? And I know that this corner here needs to be meeting up with this corner right here, where it's like we're going to be gluing all these together. So I'm going to come in close enough to the base. I like the orientation of that, so I'm going to hold control, and now I'm going to come to this corner right here. I'm going to orbit this over, take a look at this top face, and now we're going to see we have some different options. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring it somewhere up on this face, hold control to keep my orientation correct. I like that point, so I'm going to go ahead and pick it. All right, and now that block slides in exactly where it wants to go. All right, the motion I'm wanting obviously is going to be rigid. Okay, so I can go ahead and say okay. Okay, and just like that, okay, we have our very simple construction block assembly. Okay, just like so. All right, so that's it. That's going to be your first assembly with core training using Fusion 360 and joints.